Welcome to the Performance Formula with JODY Martins. So Sarah, officially welcome to the Performance Formula podcast. It is really, really awesome having you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this conversation. And so maybe by way of just sort of setting the tone, give us a little bit of a who you are, what you do, where you're from, short, sharp, sweet, and succinct.
Yeah, so I live in Evergreen, Colorado. It's a mountain suburb of Denver, Colorado, with my partner Kyle and our three animals, two dogs and a cat, in a small 500 square foot cabin. Really peaceful here. I teach, I'm a professor. I'm an associate professor of kinesiology. I specifically teach sports psychology and coaching education classes. I'm also an artist. I'm a musician, so I play music gigs and I paint and have just been kind of enjoying, as a part of the grind for a while. The book was kind of a part of that grind as well with Dear Coach. Obviously, I'm the author of Dear Coach. What I wish I could have told you, letters from your athletes. And I used to be an athlete and was very much a part of the grind culture. But, as I started out with my simple living rather than what I do, I more so want to precede it by who I am. And the last, 5-7 years has been a lot of me getting off of the grind train and that helping my own mental health, my own just work-life balance. And the book was definitely that. It was definitely a kind of an extension of my PhD and publishing something and checking the next box. It was definitely a passion project and one that I really enjoyed doing. At the core of who I am, I'm an advocate. So the book is very much an advocacy effort, not necessarily to beat coaches down and say, hey, you're doing everything wrong and I'm going to advocate for athletes, but it's really to advocate. The book, I think on the surface, people might read it and be like, oh no, dear coach, what I wish I could have told you. These are going to be a lot of bashing letters. But really, when you read between the lines, there's a lot of empathy in the book. I wrote it from a very empathetic space. And it's a larger advocacy effort for coaches, actually, because you really start to realize when you look into coaching education, looking into coaching resources, there's not really anything out there. We support athletes' mental health. We give athletes all the resources they need to perform well. And coaches are just kind of there as a means to an end. And that has a really, um, that doesn't do well for coaches' mental health. I think it's a part of the puzzle that we as organizations, NGBs, have not fully addressed. And I think once we can make all sports stakeholders feel psychologically safe, feel like they have resources that are available to them when the rug gets pulled from under them in life, then everybody will start performing better. And it's a trickle down effect, as we all know. So if we have mentally healthier coaches, we'll have mentally healthier athletes.
Yeah, and vice versa.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, I think when I saw your profile, sorry, and I was sort of thinking about this conversation, I think the things that sort of stirred my imagination the most and that I'm probably most curious about was what you found when you did this research. Like what were some of the surprising goods and bads
Yes.
that maybe you didn't know about before or assumed differently? I'm curious if you could just shine a little bit of a light on that.
Absolutely. The first thing that comes to mind, we all have biases, and I was taught that in school, and I teach it now as a professor. There's no way we can get away from not having a bias. It's just a matter of us doing our due diligence to try to make our implicit biases explicit so that they don't direct our behavior unknowingly. And so a bias of mine, informed by my lived experience as an athlete, informed by the fact that I had more constructive letters to write than thank you letters. I thought when I posed the question, dear athletes, what do you wish you could tell your coach but never did? They were all going to be, hey, I didn't like that you did this. You should have done this. I thought it would have been more letters addressed to coaches that were abusive. So I was really bracing myself for that. And the book largely does have those. I think there's 17 letters. There's 11 letters, though. Unbeknownst to me, I got a bunch of thank you letters. And I remember being a little floored and kind of giggled, I remember, when I started receiving them, because I was very, Oh, here, this is why our biases are important for us to realize. So I was able to address that in the moment. But that was surprising to me because my first two degrees, my bachelor's of science and my master's of science degrees, are in communication studies with a concentration in interpersonal communication. So 6 years worth of learning how to better communicate in interpersonal or even organizationally. Now, when I started receiving the thank you letters and I was in my sports psychology PhD, both of those worlds collided because my assumption was lack of communication is only happening because it's a bad coach athlete relationship. But what I really started seeing is that there is a lack of communication on all fronts, even within a quality coach athlete relationship. That why is it that I'm posing the question, dear coach, what do I wish I could have told you but never did? And I'm receiving thank you letters. Like, you would think if it's a thank you letter, that's easy to communicate. So why did that go left unsaid? That was really remarkable to me. And then when I really just started thinking about through my own lived experience, but then sport in general, sport doesn't, the concept of compassion, therapeutic relationships, a lot of counseling skills that I've learned in my profession, um, those aren't buzzwords. We like the really like mental toughness and, like be coachable. And basically what that means is shut up and do what your coach says. And if you're good at doing that, so we strip autonomy away from athletes. So by the time they get to college or they're professional athletes, they have learned that to be a good athlete is to be silent, even in the good or the bad. Maybe they pat their coach on the back and say, "Hey, thanks, coach," at the end of the year. But what specifically, how are we positively reinforcing the coach? Like, what exactly did I do? The coach is just making guesses. So this all comes down to, sure, the letters were written to the coaches to say, this is what I wish you would have done. And sure, you could read it egotistically and be like, I'm being called out. But in reality, what this book's really calling out is we need to have better teach better communication, better autonomy, so that it's not just athletes telling coaches, hey, thanks. It's them learning that it's also important to say, hey, thanks for these specific X, Y, and Z things, as to not make the coach have to make their own assumptions, which could be wrong.
Yeah, I have a great, it's not mine, and I don't know, maybe you know it, but it's like if you assume things, you make an ass out of you and me.
Yep,
Yeah, and so
absolutely.
I feel like that's sort of directly what you're speaking towards there, is that what do you think with your experience stops people from communicating with each other, whether it is like the thank you and the wow, I really appreciate you did ABC for me, and being a bit more specific with that. Do you think it's like, just general how we are raised, or do you think there are specific things that, you know, is sort of hampering that communication, or is there something else, that I'm maybe not mentioning that you're aware of?
Yeah, I think that um one, the coachability thing. I mean, some of it is like you hear like, oh, that athlete's really coachable, and it's kind of thought of like, oh, that makes them a good athlete because they're coachable. And the subtext you're writing is they're coachable because they do what I say, instead of, a lot of, like, I worked in professional baseball for a little while, and it was very much like any of the baseball is very kind of militant, to be honest with you, at least the organization I was with. And from my understanding, most organizations are this way. It's like you're not allowed to, you have to shave your beard. The only time if you make it to the majors, you can do what you want. Everybody kind of has to have the same hairstyle. It can't be too off. You can't show any jewelry. So there's just all these rules, and you're really stifling these these athletes. So take this example I'm giving and maybe superimpose it on how it might look in other sports. But I had a lot of athletes, some of these baseball players coming into my office, we're talking about mental strength and stuff. And they would like, and maybe it's because I was a woman, I don't know, they would share with me how it almost shaving their beard made them feel like a child, but yet they're in a professional sport. So you're like forcing them, like, instead of just allowing somebody to choose, but yet the coach is saying you have to do this. The organization is saying you have to do this. And we're going to consider you coachable or not, whether you shave your face or whether you keep your hair cut away that you don't want it, how we want it. You can't show your jewelry. You can't be authentic to yourself. You have to be like every other person. And I remember this other story when I was playing basketball growing up. There was another team, and they had a player on the team who was amazing. and he wanted to wear these hot pink sneakers to the game. It was breast cancer awareness month. I think his mother had battled with it, and the coach just had to come apart. Was like, we will not have anybody on this team that doesn't look uniform, who doesn't look like. And in reality, what was happening is it caused more frustration with this athlete, and it was impeding the athlete's mental strength to be able to just show how they wanted to. There's a TV show right now on Apple TV called Stick with Owen Wilson, and it is just creme de la creme. I love it. He finds this golfer who's kind of he's at this driving range. Owen Wilson is this kind of beat up, washed up professional golfer. And he comes across this kid who's a nobody who just has the swing of the millennia. And he's like, hey, I think we can get you to US amateurs. And Owen is sitting there like trying to coach him, being like, you got to be coachable, you got to be coachable. And the kid is just breaking down out on the course. And then the moment he comes back into the game, the back nine, he doesn't listen to Owen at all. And he just sits there, and Owen's name on the show is Price. He just sits there. Price is telling him to do these things, and kid just kind of looks up and shrugs. And he goes up there. It's like think about Happy Gilmore. Like Happy Gilmore just went out there with a hockey stick. I was like, this is how I play, and I'm going to beat everyone. I think coaches are very much, it's this really kind of egotistical power battle. And a lot of it is that coaches coach the way they were coached, and we have the cycle of athletes coming coaches, and there's no actual formalized coaching education in there to teach about the concept of self-determination theory, for example, and the three components that can help move somebody from extrinsically motivated to intrinsically motivated, which gets higher levels of performance when you're intrinsically motivated, is to give somebody autonomy, relatedness, and that's where that authenticity piece comes in. But if you're stripping them of authenticity, you're not relating with them authentically. And competence, making them feel competent in their game. So if you're constantly picking apart what they're doing, they're kind of like, am I even good at this, or am I just a robot? So I think so much of this communication we don't empower athletes, and then coaches who used to be athletes weren't empowered to communicate. So we have this cycle going on. Back when Title IX came about, for example, in 1972, to bring some history into this, we had 1972, Title IX comes out to make more access for women. But one of the barriers for women to become coaches was that there used to be a rule that you had to have at least a master's degree to be a coach. But when Title IX came out and we started seeing this massive decline in women's coaches and a higher increase in men's coaches, we had to get rid of the education piece, because we weren't coming out of an era, we weren't coming out of decades where women were getting educated. They were housewives at best. So we haven't, I think there's a lot of, and the way I wrote the book is I'm not the expert with a capital T, I'm an expert. I think it's going to take a lot of people getting around a table to have discussions on things that we can implement to make sports psychologically safer for coaches, such as coach mental health initiatives, give athletes more voice, maybe end of the year coaching evaluations, just like I have to have at end of the semester teaching evals. I think coaching education, making that a requirement, also making it accessible. So I think there's a lot of things that we need to change, and I know it's a marathon. So everything I'm talking about here isn't like, we got to do this tomorrow. I would love if I could snap my fingers, and I think that's why I got burned out a little in the beginning. I wanted my book to kind of come out blazing and policies to be made within a year or something, and I just kind of reevaluated. It's like, no, I think this book's a slow burn.
I mean, there's so many things you mentioned there that piques my interest. One of the things that you say that I've had to deal with a lot. So I find myself in a unique position where I coach sport as a technical / skills based coach, coaching cricket, and then apart from that, I play the role as a mental performance coach. And it is quite interesting that in my mental performance clients, I would often find myself having this type of conversation with them where it's like, okay, I get that your coach is saying to you, do A, B, C. But in our conversation, we've realized that X, Y, and Z is what works better for you. And so I don't want to be the one that tells you don't listen to your coach, because that can be seen as disrespectful. But at the same point in time, if you know that this other stuff works for you, how much longer are you essentially going to allow somebody else to dictate your performance to you?
Yes.
And so I find that, but then I think of myself as a skills-based coach and I go, okay, hang on. Maybe there's places that I step over these boundaries, right? Because I have this awareness that it's not a good thing. But as soon as I put my skills coach hat on, I feel like I step into a slightly different, it's a different hat I'm wearing. And so my approach with that at times is a bit different. I see myself as a coach I ask a lot of questions. I try and engage the athletes I work with, not just tell them you have to do it like this. But I'll give a simple example. So at the academy I was at, and so it leads specifically off what you're saying. So I'm curious to see if there's a balance or what you can sort of stir in my thinking about the balance between the two. So I get the whole, if you're playing as a team, you look like a team. I get that, right? Like there's a part of that that sort of makes sense in my mind, right? Like teams that win, they walk in a similar way, they talk in a similar way, yet there's this idea of individuality and being your unique self, being your authentic self, and being able to show that. And so I'm so as an example, at the academy I'm at, half the team will have their shirts tucked in, half the teams will have their shirts tucked out. I sit as a coach on the side of the field. I look at that and I go, this looks messy from a team unity point of view. So I say, hey, and cricket, the sport that I coach, by its nature, shirts tucked in is sort of the, um, I mean, you watch cricket on TV now with professionals playing a lot of T20 cricket. A lot of their shirts are tucked out, right? So I'm personally, some of my values are being bumped around here. But in the original, legit, if you think of cricket as a game, shirts are tucked in, right? And so in the academy, we've sort of started implementing this, right? Okay, cool. We want to see the boys' shirts tucked in because if you go around New Jersey and you see all the other academies, yeah, shirts are in, it just looks messy. So I'm thinking like, okay, if we can come as one academy and all of us can have our shirts tucked in, that starts sending a message, right? We're moving the needle in a way. So then what I think from an individuality point of view is like the way you arrive, I don't care too much. If you want to arrive in your slip slops or you want to arrive in your cricket shoes, like I don't care too much about that. I don't care too much. I don't care too much about necessarily how you come to practice. The academy has some rules around that, but like to me personally, if somebody comes in clothing that's sort of comfortable with him, personally, I wouldn't have too big of a problem with that. And so it's kind of interesting with what you sort of thrown at me and how my head's sort of reasoning these things. So I've now said a whole bunch, and there's not necessarily a question in there specifically, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what I have to
Yes,
say. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, the main theme that's coming out to me is tradition. So I hear what you're saying. It feels to me like it's tethered to the tradition of the game of cricket.
Yeah.
Does that align
Yeah.
with you? So I think, and then my next one is, so why, like, um, why does it matter that they have why does it matter that they have their shirts tucked in? I did hear you say so that because when they don't, it looks messy. We want to look uniform. We want to look together. It sends a message. What is the message that you're trying to send?
So I think it's like a message of sort of cohesiveness, like that we arrive in the same way and we're one unit. So we might be a bunch of individuals playing the game, but we look as one, if that makes
Mm.
sense. And so
Yeah,
that then mirrors for me a lot of the coaching that I'm doing with these kids, where they're pulling in different directions and there's sometimes a lot of infighting, like they're 13 years old. The sort of age group I focus on mainly 13 to 15. And so I think a lot of them don't understand the concept of team
mm,
yet, and so I think that
yes,
a lot of my coaching with them at times is geared towards, hey, it's not so much just about you, it's also about the team. And so I feel like it fits with that messaging, right? That, hey,
yeah,
we're one, so we look as one.
yeah,
You have freedom in other spaces, but when we arrive to a game, we look as one. We don't wear our cap the wrong way around. We put it on the right way because that respects the organization. So I feel like there's these values that underpin the simplicity of I'm tucking my shirt in. if that makes sense. And hey,
Yeah.
what I'm realizing as I'm explaining this to you, this might not be the only way that you could achieve that message, right? There could most
Yeah.
probably be other ways, but yeah,
Well, I
that's where my
think
thinking is at with it.
to some extent, so team cohesion is measured by two variables. There's the social measure, so how cohesive the team is together, and then there's the tasks, so being cohesive on like what's actually happening. To me, what happens is when you get caught up, and this is me just kind of riffing with you, so I'm curious what your thoughts on this. When you get caught up in what you look like and how you're presenting to the other team, there's a dissonance there to me. Like you're not actually measuring team cohesion correctly. It's almost like I mean, to put it in other terms, if we're thinking like, a lot of people like to throw out the culture, we're family, we're family. Well, maybe some people listening to this, maybe you, I know I can resonate with the family that presents to the world like they have their shit together, and then when they're home, they don't. So you can present all day long by tucking the shirts in, having the cat facing forward, but if you're not actually cohesive, so you can present to look cohesive, but if you're not actually cohesive, then the players and even the coaches can intuitively understand that this is like, I don't respect this. Like, I don't, this isn't respectable. We're trying to look to people. Like, that's when I worked in baseball, it kind of felt that way. It was like they were more concerned about the guys shaving their beards and having their hair look a certain way and stripping them of their authenticity than they actually were about dealing with the very vulnerable component of cohesion. Another thing that you've brought up is the concept of values, of the values of the organization. But what happens is that then supersedes and basically subtextually tells the athlete that their value doesn't matter. You either come in and assimilate to the organization's values, or you're not a good cultural fit. And I've been told that many a times as a woman working in an all male space that I wasn't a quote unquote good cultural fit. And a lot of these players that were males were told they weren't a good cultural fit. And it was because they weren't quote unquote coachable. They weren't slash adhering to the values that the organization set for these athletes, when in reality it's about, so coming back to self-determination theory and providing autonomy, to me, to be a good coach is to sit back and be like, let's look at everybody's values on the team, and maybe there's some that overlap, maybe there's some that are not. How can we respect that value as you as an individual? How can we highlight it at times? Like, it's really getting into the nitty gritty of team cohesion. And I do think, to empathize with coaches, coaches don't have a lot of time. Like, this stuff I'm talking about right now is a little frilly, right? It's like, I'd rather work on the X's and O's. But what I'm really getting at is that in order for us to make cultural shifts that need to be made, to make sport a mentally and emotionally, physically safer place for all sports stakeholders, we're going to have to chasse and welcome vulnerability into the mix. That's also not a buzzword. It's a little fluffy. A lot of people are probably rolling their eyes as they hear me say this. But you can do all day long and try to present. You can put on the uniform. You can make them cut their hair. You can make them put their... But if the outward appearance doesn't match the inward dynamics of the team, then that actually is going to work against the organization. So that's some of what I think is really important here. Is it's less dictator-esque. Like, we're dictating to you how you have to dress, what you have to do. And a lot of people, I mean, we don't even live in a country that likes that. So, but then in sport, we see that a lot. We see a lot of coaches as dictators. And that word, I know, is cringy to use, but that's exactly what it is. We see organizations that are doing that. And there's no real... One of the questions that was really interesting to me when I first started working in baseball, in one of the opening meetings, they were like talking about tradition, and they were like, why do we do some of the things we do? And it was like, I think something really powerful for organizations to do is to challenge tradition. I'm not saying tradition is bad, but really, really look, is tradition holding us back from optimal performance? Sometimes it is, actually. Like in baseball, the tradition of shaving their beards, like I had more guys come in and talk about how it made them feel more insecure because their beards hid their face acne, right? Like, I could understand, I don't, deal with that obviously, but I could understand that. It made them feel more mature. It made them feel like a professional. It made them feel like a man. and then they liked having their hair a little bit longer because they liked how it looked. Like, I just, you're making them feel like a child, feel like a little boy. And then you're asking them to go out there and play a game like a professional athlete. It was just like, gosh, that tradition of like, this is baseball. This is what we've been doing since the 1950s. I'm like, we live in a different era. So I think traditions maybe the base of them can stay there, but they can morph a little bit. They need to have some more flexibility, some more breathing room.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, maybe what you're saying is sort of a little bit of a both andness to the idea. I mean, I don't know baseball that well, but I would think and I would imagine it would be very weird if baseball players all of a sudden arrive, you know, with different shirts on, as an example, right? That would not work in my. There's no sports team anywhere in the world where players arrive with different clothes.
Yeah.
And so, as an example, and maybe saying something like, "Hey, we have our shirts tucked in," might not be such a bad thing if you know that. What I'm hearing you sort of explaining, you're also spending the time on building the cohesion behind the scenes, so to speak. This group of players I work with, they are like socially, they are the best friends.
Yeah.
Off the field, which is half of my battle at times with them, is getting them into the game, because they would sit and have a party next to the field
Yeah.
every weekend if and so I feel like a couple of these little things that I'm bumping their way is to try and help them to understand, hey, we're actually playing a game here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Focus should be a little bit away from, what did you do last night, the more to what's happening right now. um, and I mean, I think what I'm aware of is just to make sure that we're not just making rules, say, potentially as an organization, in the name of a tradition, and not connecting it really deeply with something more meaningful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that meaningfulness, though, I'll put it this way, I'm not a traditionalist at all. And it's taken me years to understand that, because sport is very traditional in a lot of ways, across many sports, individual, team, whatever you want to call it. And I really struggled in sport. I probably wouldn't have been called coachable at all. I didn't like just the thought of somebody telling me what to do, I don't like it. That's why I like my job as a professor. My boss gives me almost too much autonomy. Sometimes I'm like, come on, Terry, give me a little direction. But I love him. He's the best boss I've ever had. I've never done well with people telling me what to do. And that's something I really want to bring into this conversation here is multicultural psychology. Every human being, you said that you were, born in South Africa. There's a culture there that influenced how you are as a person. And there's values a part of that culture that you either accepted or you didn't like or whatever, but it informed who you were. I am a female that was raised in a Southern Baptist Alabama by a very traditional mother and a doesn't really know who he is father. And so those things really informed me as a woman. And what I mean by that is, like, in the Southern Baptist Church, to be a good woman, quote unquote, is to be meek, submissive, let the man lead, be in a heterosexual relationship. All these very, like, the woman is marginalized, both religiously and socially. So I looked at women. If a woman, like who I am now, walks into a room and commands a space, she's a perversion of a woman. So all these things, this might not seem like it makes sense now, but all these things are going to then come into sport. What does that mean? I would have a coach yelling at me being like, you need to be more confident. You need to be more confident. But I had a church and a mother over here saying confidence is arrogance and that doesn't look good on a woman. And then my coach is over here going, you're not really that good of an athlete. You're not going to be right. But there's cultures there. So when you say making values and stuff like that and meaning, it's about asking, what is the meaning the athletes have? Because you might be having every great intention of saying this is the meaning and you can communicate it in every which way. But if the athlete doesn't also subscribe to that same meaning, then it's going to fall on deaf ears. And so some of it is like, to me, if like the tucking in of the shirts, like, yeah, you and the organization can come up with whatever meaning you want, but the athlete also has autonomy to want to receive that or not. And something tells me there's at least one a minimum of one person on there that's like me. They're not a traditionalist.
Oh, there's more than one, believe me.
That's what I figured.
There's more
Okay.
than one.
I didn't want to overshoot here, but
No,
something
there's
tells
more
me.
than one.
Yeah, something tells me. Yeah, send them this podcast recording. Be like,
Yeah.
here's somebody advocating for you. Yeah, I think that it's less. I would say something really powerful for you to do as a coach is to sit down. Another example is like how coaches coach athletes. I do not do well with people yelling at me or even simply insinuating raising the tone of their voice at all. I do not. I mean, I shut down. And when I was younger and my frontal lobe wasn't fully developed as an athlete, I didn't really make those connections. But now looking back, I'm like, I know why. I performed really well. I was a really good athlete, but I could have been exceptional if I would have known that about myself. But if coaches were to go and say like, hey, how do you respond well? How would you like to be communicated with? And if coaches from the youth level up asked that question and allowed athletes to mull over what they wanted or didn't want, we could have more empowered athletes. And so it turns into more of a conversation rather than a, hey, this is what we're doing today, boys. Hey, this is what we're doing today. It's more of, maybe even sitting down. Let's say the organization, you and the organization are all together and you're bringing up kind of a hot topic. Tucking in the shirt's not, hats backwards, hats not, whatever it might be. Rather than you throwing in the 2 cents and speaking on behalf of the team, bringing it to the team and saying, hey, this is what's being presented to the organization. What's everybody's thoughts on it? Let's have an open discourse on it. And then come so you're really the liaison. So it's less about you speaking for the team and more about you advocating for them. And I think that could also speak to team cohesion. So again, the organization can make the decisions they want, but if the team knows that you are 100% their liaison and you're sitting there carving out time saying, hey guys, we're going to end this practice 20 minutes early because I want to bring this kind of political thing to you. We've been talking about uniforms, blah, blah, blah. What are y'all's thoughts? And I bet you $1 million, the more you start doing that, the more they're going to start opening up and being like, Coach, we've been meaning to tell you, like, this whole shirts tucked in thing is for the pigs, like, it's just, does it really matter? Because I think too, sport coaches are hired, retained, and fired for the most part, depending on the NGB that they're with, on wins and losses. So if you keep losing, you're going to probably, athletes are going to, you're going to get kicked out. So what is the correlation? Where's the data that shows that shirts tucked in equals wins? So like, I understand the presenting. I'm just being the devil's advocate here. Of like,
No, I
I
hear what you're
understand
saying.
presenting is like, it looks messier. Presenting is being unified. But I think that's where it comes down to like, what actually are the measurables of team cohesion? And where, if you're doing mental performance consulting, it could be good to even bring in some like team cohesion measures, like actually measure what is the team cohesion, where are the gaps, where could we get better? Because my understanding, I didn't do research in team cohesion, but I definitely like learned about it in school and teach about it now as a professor. And the kind of cohesionist that we talk about doesn't necessarily get into the presentation of cohesion, if that makes sense. It's more kind of about like, do you feel connected with your team as it pertains to this particular task at hand or something along those lines. But I think this conversation has been great because it helps to situate this kind of higher order concept I talk about into an actual practical example. And I think really it boils down to like you as the coach going and saying, hey, there's this topic we've been talking about as an organization. I'd love to hear y'all's feedback. I want everybody to feel like their voices are heard. And just pose the question to them. And I wouldn't even start out as the coach and say, this is what I think. I would just leave it, hey, here's the question. I'm just curious. Let's have a conversation around it. What do y'all think?
Yeah, it's kind of weird because as we're having this conversation, I mean, a lot of my thinking is, which so many of these podcast conversations do, challenges my own thinking, right? And I never intended with this podcast to have the podcast. It's going to sound very vain for the benefit of other people. It's normally for the benefit of me. And I feel like I have these wonderful conversations with people and then in the past, I used to just keep them by myself, like, oh, JODY has more knowledge or JODY has a better understanding of something or a different understanding of something. So I thought, let me start a podcast. I have these great conversations and then I can share them with other people.
Yeah.
And so often they challenge my thinking quite a lot. I think what I'm realizing for myself, so far in this conversation is a lot of what you speak about, I agree 100% with. It's not foreign to me. It's not um, far out for me to say, hey, open it up to the team. Because there's many places that I do that. As an example, I don't do the preparation of the team for the weekend games. They come up with that. I say, there's the captain, the vice captain, and a couple of other members of the team. They come every week and they present to us and they say, well, this is who we're playing. These are their strong players. These are their weak players. This is how we think. So like the idea and the concept of it isn't foreign to me. Like there's definite spaces um, where I'm sort of, I know that I step outside of just as the coach, I dictate.
Yeah.
Silly little example yesterday, because I am aware of these things, giving athletes an autonomy. Just yesterday, I did a fielding practice and we played a game. And so I started the game with a couple of rules. I said, right, there are 4 rules in this game. These are the rules that we're going to play the game with. After like 5 minutes, we stopped it and said, right, you can now change any of the rules, create any new rule you want to, or delete any rule. Right? So there's
Yeah.
boundaries within which we play. Yeah, off you go. And some of the stuff they came up with was really good. And some of it was horrible. It just made the game worse and clunky and it became very messy. But for me, that's what it's about, right? So next time we do it, they might make better decisions. So I'm like completely understanding of the idea and the concept, right? Like for me, it's
Yeah.
not, and I feel like when I do these things, whether it was in South Africa or it's it's at times things that get spoken about, but we don't always apply it. Like I know many coaches will say, "Yeah, no, we must," and in South Africa in particular, we had a very long period of time where we drove this idea of having what was the language we called it? Self-directed athletes. It wasn't the word, but it was that idea, and it was spoken in our cricket coaching space at higher levels, all the way down on into our coaching
Yeah.
courses, coach education. Everything got imprinted with this idea, but the execution of it was just never visible, right?
Mm,
And I think for me, I have maybe a different understanding of it because of my mental performance
yeah.
background. Not a lot of coaches have sort of both. Most coaches get educated in the skills, how to coach the game, how to teach people to throw and hit, and then but the actual skill of coaching, asking questions, listening to people, understanding, etc., that doesn't get taught. You have to go somewhere special to learn that. So I have this deep understanding of this, and then I go, okay, cool. So there's this idea about the shirts being tucked in, because personally I'm very about this, right, in
Yeah.
my head. Because like I say, I feel like it conveys a certain message. But I think where I faltered with it is I have this meaning I attached to it. And maybe what I could have done a little bit better with the teams was saying, hey, this is something that's important to me. How do you guys feel about it? Because in that way,
Ooh,
I could
yeah.
have most probably signed them up to my idea rather than just saying, hey, this is what we want. As the coach, you've got a lot of freedom in a lot of spaces in my teams. Like I give a lot of freedom with a lot of things. So I think in hindsight, I sort of thought, well, this is the one thing I want.
Yes,
Instead of saying, yes,
absolutely.
this is one thing I want, but it's still our team.
Absolutely.
It's not
I
just my team or your team, it's our team. And so this is something that's important to me. You have freedom in many spaces, and I'm going to give you spaces where I'm going to give you even freedom other coaches maybe have never given you before. This is something that's important to me. Can we have a conversation about it? That would have maybe
absolutely.
been a slightly better approach than maybe the way in which we did it,
And I
especially in the
think
early days. Yeah.
that is a beautiful example in circling back around to the question you asked of like how can we what's the barrier, how can we increase communication, that right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm realizing that this has a lot of meaning to me and this is why. That could also be a really great for you to just share more about yourself. Like why is it important for you for the uniforms to be tucked in? Let's have a larger conversation about this though. Because something else too is like um, not every coach is privy to the backgrounds of every athlete. What I mean by that is like childhood traumas. Maybe they had parents, grandparents, guardians that were very dictator-esque, like they had to control the environment. And so even you coming in with as much freedom as you provide, the one time you do kind of dictate something that might seem small to you and you're like, well, everything else I'm giving so much freedom, that could still trigger something in them and have an adverse effect. So the more that you can just open up dialogue and talk about like, hey, this is something that's important to me, but let's open up for larger discussion. Does anybody feel like this impedes them in their performance? Because I know for me, I in basketball, I always like to have my like jersey tucked under my bra strap. It truly did make me feel like I had a more upper range of motion than when I had it out. Or we had a coach one time that wanted us to wear sleeves, and oh my gosh, I truly mean this. It wasn't because when the coach dictated, it pissed me off even more. But I hated wearing sleeves because I just felt like the range of motion, just for my shot, for everything, it just felt like it weighed me down. And but they never asked me that. They were just like, you have to wear a t-shirt under your jersey. For whatever reason. Again, I grew up in the South, so it was all about modesty for women. So it could have just been like, we don't want to make sure we see any side boob or anything like that. And it felt, versus the coach being like, hey, here's some options for you. Like my preference is this, but if it's something that you really feel like is going to impede your performance, so I think, again, coaches, the book itself is very much written from an empathic space, but it's a lot of this stuff, like you said, of like you coach the way you were coached, or you haven't actually even been taught how to approach conversations. I mean, something too that came up when you were chatting is like, how is it for you? So if you were born and raised in South Africa, is that correct? And then when did you move here to the United States?
4 months ago now.
Okay. Oh my gosh. How has that been for you? Be coaching and doing all that stuff in South Africa, and then because to me, what are the cultural differences you've seen with the
So,
athletes?
so, so I spent 6 months sort of in the US last year, traveling around a little bit in the sort of cricket space, and then I met the people at this academy, and then they sort of said, "Hey, we're looking for a coach. Are you keen?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So the first thing to maybe understand is that we can talk America, yeah, all we want, but it's not American. It's primarily expat Indian and Pakistani um, people that play cricket within the US. I don't think there's a lot of Native Americans in inverted commas that,
Yeah,
not that I think that any people here are really native other than the native Indians, but
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, but um, so the so last year when I was sort of spending a lot of time within these communities, the realization is it is more the Indian mindset. It's not really the American mindset that you're working with or the American values. It's more the Indian values, the Indian culture. And that culture is not too dissimilar from the Afrikaans culture in South Africa. It is very much a similar where parents are very hard on kids as a generalization. Again, not all parents, but as a generalization across the board. Where as a child, you almost like can't put a foot wrong. Dad is
Mm,
the authority. Like whatever dad says goes to a certain extent. Um, and so a lot of my personal growth and personal development has been about breaking down some of those things, because the relationship I'm in, if I was the dictator in that way in my relationship, I would not have a relationship.
yeah.
And I wouldn't say that that's necessarily always the case, because we have what I would call tendencies, like you have your old programming that kicks in at times and it's like, oh shucks, hang on, I'm doing this again.
Yeah.
Okay, rewind a little bit. So I haven't actually found the coaching in the US from a cricket point of view to challenge me that much. As soon as I got my head in my mind around that, okay, hang on. This is very similar. Yeah, there's differences, there always are, but it's very similar to how it is in South Africa, and I can sort of approach it in a similar way. I feel like it's helped me navigate that a bit better than maybe I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know if I was yet to coach a baseball team, as an
Yeah.
example, and how that would be. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think too, hearing you speak, a powerful kind of story is coming to mind. When I taught methods of coaching in person, I teach fully online currently for the past couple of years. But pre-COVID, I was teaching face-to-face, and I was teaching methods coaching course, and without fail, oh my gosh, there was every class I taught, and I think it was like lesson 7, we talk about the coach-athlete relationship and kind of emotional abusive coaching and things like that. It would always, in some shape or fashion, be an athlete, and it was usually a male athlete. I will say this: I'm pretty sure the entire time it was a male athlete. They would raise their hand and they would be like, "Well, I need the coach to get into my face and yell at me and kind of almost humiliate me. It motivates me." And so I always kind of, the first time this happened, it was very improv, but it turned into a powerful lesson. I would then proceed to flip tables, throw the textbook up against the wall, and tell the student slash athlete, quote unquote, that, they can do better. They should have made an A on the last assignment. I'm ashamed of them. They need to get back out there and actually put effort in. And the whole class would be like eyes wide. I mean, I'm a petite 5'5", pretty joyful individual. So seeing me in rage mode was a little, and then I would proceed to apologize. I'd be like, "I'm so sorry if that was very triggering to you all. If you want to talk after, I can get you connected to counseling services if you need." But my point was, if I came in every day and you weren't performing up to par and you were making C's and D's on these assignments and I was yelling at you and humiliating you in front of your classmates, you would be in my boss's office by the end of the day, and I would probably lose my job by the end of the week, if not the end of the semester. So, but why is that behavior, like if I couldn't do that in a classroom, but it's okay on a playing field? And then secondly, we talk about bringing back to self-determination theory, talking about extrinsic, intrinsic motivation. Yelling at an athlete and telling them to perform a certain way will get you short-term success. The next play or the play after, they might, actually hit the home run, or they might do what you said, but it's out of wanting to please you as the coach. So it's externally motivated. I want to do this so the coach isn't mad at me anymore. So the athlete, in order to be coachable, quote unquote, they have conned themselves, tricked themselves into thinking that they need the coach to yell at them to get performance, because they did get acute success, but that success was tethered to avoiding the abusive behavior of the coach. So then the coach, it's this like kind of weird dysfunctional cycle of the coach also sees that. "Oh, see, I yelled at them and then they went and performed well." But then maybe 2 plays later, they don't perform well and the coach has to re-yell at the athlete. So it's just a cycle of yelling that gets acute. But now what we're doing is we're creating an abusive neural pathway where the athlete is sitting in my methods of coaching class at the graduate level and undergraduate level saying, "I need to be verbally abused." We have tricked people into thinking they need abuse to perform well. And so something going back, I bring that story in because you mentioned similar values raised similarly. They have, like, you can't put your foot down wrong or you might, make dad or mom mad, whatever. If they've never seen any other type of authority figure allow freedom, like some of the freedom you're providing, they might not know what to do with it. And I'm also speaking at this. I was raised in a very abusive home. I was coached by abusive coaches. I was also the player in the back of the room saying, "I need a coach to get in my face." It took me years of mental therapy to actually realize that was a coping mechanism versus, like, I was telling myself I needed that in order to cope with the fact that I couldn't control somebody abusing me or not. I hadn't been empowered to know how to stand up for myself or how to walk away from domestic violence, from coaching violence. And sport is very much like we allow that. We see coaches on the sidelines all the time, and people are like, "Well, what about Nick Saban? What about blah, blah, blah?" All these things, like coaches, and a lot of times abusive. So athletes turn coaches. So if I would have stayed on the same trajectory, I probably I took a step back from sport heavily. I got out of professional sport. It got to there was a breaking point, and now I'm very adjacent to it. And through years of mental health, I realized, I think the reason why I pursued sport is because I realized I could get away with a lot in sport. I could get away with being abusive myself, because abused people turn into abusers, unless there's intervention. So, and I know the word abuse itself, I know the word violence itself is very aggressive, but we also need to call it what it is. I don't want to dance. I'm not a person who likes to dance around stuff. I do believe everybody wants to have really good intentions, but there needs to be an intervention there to say, hey, what happened to you is not okay. And here's other ways that you can do it. The end of the book, part 3, for example. So the first part of the book is thank you letters. Second part are the more constructive letters. And then I provide my 2 cents at the end as an expert, not the expert. And I say, hey, if I was sitting around this table, these are the things that I would recommend. And one of the things I do when I started out is say, hey, if you're a coach reading this, you were an athlete at one point, so you probably also have your own Dear Coach letter. So take some time to write that. Dear Coach, what I wish I could have told you. Step 2, pretty vulnerable. The more honest you are, the more you're going to get out of it. Reread the letter you just wrote back to yourself as if it was an athlete under that you're managing now that wrote it to you. What might be are there things that you wrote to your old coach that you didn't like that maybe you're like, oh no, it's just masked differently, right? Maybe you're not yelling at him to get on the line and run suicides, but maybe you're like, doing it a different way. Or is there something your old coach did that you loved that you're like, oh, I actually really like that, and I think that could really be good autonomy building. I'm realizing I'm not implementing that as much as I could. Because again, we athletes turn coaches, we coach the way we were coached. And so I think that that's a powerful exercise I have coaches do when I do coaching education, for them to really realize. And then step 3 is, what should I keep doing? So what are the things I'm doing now that I really like? So some of the things you're talking about, like having them do the pre-performance stuff, I think that's great, giving them autonomy. That game you kind of had them play where they can make rules, delete rules, whatever, that seems like that I want to go play that. I mean, I'm not, never played cricket in my life, but that seems like it would just be fun. What should you start doing? What are the things that maybe former coaches of yours did that you're like, oh, I actually think that would be really good. Let me start implementing it. And what should you stop doing? What are the things that you're doing that you're like, or switch it up a little? Like the thing you brought up, the great example of, I feel a particular type of way about tucking in the shirts. This is the meaning that I have behind it, but let me go have a conversation with them and have a larger discussion. Like, I think that's something to start doing. Like, it's not necessarily, you don't have to completely recreate the wheel, but I think, let me just actually take 20 minutes at the end of a practice one day and have this conversation and see how the guys feel. Is something you could start doing.
Yeah, I'm more thinking from this conversation, something that I would like to start with the team is um, we've had it in other teams that I've coached, but I think because they were older players, it made more sense, right? Now I'm thinking, okay, younger cricketers, so you approach them differently. But as I'm me knowing me and knowing how I'm thinking, I'm like, well, why am I thinking like that? Because it's still a person that you're working with, whether they're 13 or 38 or 35 or 23, it doesn't really matter. Is almost to start. I can't remember what we called it in this one team I was involved with, but it's almost like a honesty policy period, like, okay, for the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it might be, we're just going to be honest with each other about things in the team. And the frames we normally set around that is that you're allowed to say anything, right, that you want to say, and it doesn't get judged for this period of time, at least,
Yes.
And so you create that sort of a space where people can speak their mind. And so within that, I feel that would be something healthier to set up, because then whether it's a shirt or whether it's the shoes we arrive with or whether down the line it's other behavior that we're noticing in the team, we've got a space within the team within which we can address these things.
Yeah,
Where
absolutely.
players we know we've got our 20 minutes where we can go speak our mind to the coach and to each other.
Absolutely.
So I feel like that's something I would more lean towards saying, okay, cool, I try and build something like that into what I do with the players that I work
Absolutely.
with.
And
Yeah.
if I think what would be cool is say, hey, like we're going to start doing this weekly. So like if there's something, so they become like accustomed to knowing, like maybe one week they don't have something, but then the Tuesday of the following week something happens, they're like, oh, I'll wait till Friday when we have honesty hour, right? So it's like they know that there's something upcoming where they'll be heard. So you can be like, yeah, as the week's going on, just keep tabs on if there's things you want to talk about, and when Friday at 3 p.m. comes or whatever time that is,
Then we
that's
know
your time
that's
to
your time.
shine.
That's your
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
yeah. And I would
Yeah.
say in the beginning, like if you wanted to set aside a little bit more time just for the first go at it
Yeah.
of like,
It's normally like that. The first
yeah,
couple
yeah,
of
yeah.
times it takes a bit of time to get
Yeah,
into
yeah,
it.
yeah. Because they're like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe they're like, I got a lot of stuff on my chest, or one person says something and then everybody starts it's, and not in a bad way, but just in a like, almost, I think of it like a geyser, like you just untapped something and they're just like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. Well, now that I want to say this, and yeah,
Yeah. I've also found, and you mentioned it earlier, I've found that, and I see this in my coaching every single day of my life, where, because like I said, I ask a lot of questions. I almost like try and determine more, even in skills coaching, more try and determine where they're at, what do they understand, what do they not yet understand. And then I look at it as like a wall. There's a wall. I've got to first know where's their holes. Instead of making the assumption that there's a hole somewhere, I watch, I observe a lot. So I'll throw balls or watch them bowl, sort of formulate an understanding around, my framework for the game. And then I'll ask a lot of questions based on that, because they don't always show you everything out the gate. They might be a bit nervous, or they might be, especially if it's the first session. So I'd normally ask a question like, so what did you not show me today? Like that, that you normally do that I didn't get to see with what maybe I didn't throw the ball in the right place, whatever it might be, then they'll tell me. So it'll start formulating an idea for me, say from a skills point of view, where the gaps are. And then I'll know, okay, cool. I can more safely say, hey, we need to work on this from my side. I can be a little bit more directive because I've taken the time to see where the gap is.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, and so I feel like maybe there's just more I can do in that space from a team point of view, because I feel like if at an individual level I do it, I don't want to say pretty well, but I know that I have a process that I feel is working that allows them to speak. And so this is what I want to say, that you mentioned earlier, is often when I ask them questions, they don't answer me initially. They got like
Mm,
no answers coming. And so I just keep away at it. I don't let that stop me or deter me, because I know it's most probably because they've been told their whole lives. Nobody's ever come
exactly.
and asked them. So if I'm asking, I got like this 8-year-old cricketer I work with, and he's a quiet kid by nature. I think I've coached him now for 6 or 7 sessions that he's come, hour at a time. And only now is he starting to go where I say to him, hey, what do you want to work on today? And he goes, okay, I want to work on this. Like it's something so simple where initially, what do you want to work on? And he just stares at me with these blank eyes, right? So I feel like that's the way I empower them it's their game.
Yes.
It's their game. They got to build an understanding of what they're good at, what they're bad at, what they want to work on, what they're struggling with. I don't get to bat for you on the pitch or bowl on the pitch for you. You're the one doing that. You're the one
Yep.
that knows best. So if you're not coming to my session telling me, coach, this is what we need to improve in, then
Yeah.
how the heck must I know what to do with you? Then
See, yeah.
then I'm making an assumption. I'm stabbing in the dark, and we hope my
Yep.
dart hits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just have to say I love so I mean I really just get such a sense of like your approach, and like you said, your mental performance understanding is just so spot on with so many things. So I just want to affirm that. Something else too, maybe, and maybe you even ask it this way, but like before, I'll tell coaches like coming back to the concept of autonomy. I'll say, hey, let's say you want to work on layups in basketball or something. And like looking at the stats from the last game, your weakest point was the layup game or free throws or whatever it is. So you say, hey, everybody, we're going to work on free throws today, but here's 3 different things that we can do, drills that we can do to accomplish this task. Who wants to do drill number 1? Raise their hands. And so that's a way that you can give autonomy versus like having to dictate like this is the drill we're doing. And so it makes them feel like they have like, yes, we agree the stats are showing the layups were the worst, but we have a little bit of say. I think too though, with you talking about the gaps, is if you start out and you're like, hey, today we're going to do this, and what I want y'all to do is I want you to obviously focus on the task, but I want you to look for where are the gaps in the team, like where do you see the weaknesses, and when we get done with this drill I'll ask you that. So you almost prime them for the question you're going to ask, so they're looking for it either explicitly or implicitly. So then when you roll, you're not kind of hitting them with a question at the end of like, where did you see the gaps, and they didn't really know to look for it. But what's really cool about doing that So saying, hey, like, because you're already doing that yourself as a coach, that's what coaches do. Like, where are the gaps? How can we get stronger in these gaps? Whatever. But you're teaching them how to coach themselves. Because, like you said, tennis is this way, golf, like you can't pitch for them, you can't do any of that stuff. So you're really that self-directed, I think is what you talked about earlier, coaching. You're teaching them how to be their own coach. And that's so powerful because when they get to the collegiate or the professional level or whatever the highest level for cricket is, they feel empowered. They know that in any type of game-like situation that they're going to be able to make a quality game time decision, and they're not constantly looking at their coach on the sideline for what to do.
Or their
And that's
parent at
the
times.
yeah, or parents. That's extrinsic motivation. When, as you know, as mental performance, we're trying to build intrinsically motivated players. So asking the question like, hey, at the end of this, I'm going to ask you like, where did you see the weak points? So be on the lookout for that on top of like, just like executing the skill properly.
Joe, I don't know how much time we have. I have one more question, and I don't know
Yeah.
how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's
and
roll with it.
I've loved sort of this conversation, but there's this in the back of my head. I keep thinking, right? So there's these letters that you've got, and we've sort of spent quite a lot of time maybe talking towards sort of spaces coaches can be better, but almost more from a negative place, if I can say it like that. More things that we potentially do wrong that we could be better at. In these letters, were there any sort of threads or similarities between things that coaches do really well?
Yes. And I mean, I even want to highlight some of the stuff you're talking about. It sounds like you really implement a lot of fun with the
I
team that
try
you
my
work with.
best. I try
Yes,
my
like
best.
I mean, I'm sitting
Yeah.
here being like, man, that sounds fun to like delete rules, add rules,
I
just
do
the
my best
create.
with as much fun as possible, as often as possible.
That's what I'm saying. That
Yeah.
was a major theme. And like there was one letter where they said the coach did a Halloween practice and they would all show up in costumes and it was just silly and they were like whatever, I forget the sport they were playing, but they would just play the sport in their costumes and it was like a tradition, right? Let's bring back that tradition word. Again, I think tradition is wonderful. It's just a matter of like, is this tradition that we have helpful or hurtful? Is it performance enhancing versus performance hindering? And so that was fun. They had another one of the letters talked about how a coach, like right before a game, I don't know if you know that slap hands game where you have two people, one person has their hands facing up, the person's facing towards them with their hands on top of the other person's, and the person's with the hands on the bottom tries to slap the other person's hands on top. And that's what they would do before a game. And it was just the coach's purpose was just to get them in a silly, loose mood. And there is a lot of research that supports playfulness having performance enhancing mechanisms on the person's. So there was a theme of that, of like coaches that were just there to have fun. And some of these coaches were at the like NCAA Division I level. Like this isn't, I think some people, their bias goes to like, that's probably a youth sport and they're playing with kids, blah, blah. I'm like, no, these were very well-to-do coaches that were making very good money for, you know, NCAA gold medal teams that were doing stuff like this. So another one was that really stood out to me is this one player, this one athlete had a coach and they were like, they were a gold medalist athlete. And so I found this amazing that their coach, the athlete would perform and the coach would come up and just almost be like their biggest fan. They were like, oh my gosh, did you see like that turn that you did and that thing blah? And like they just like the athlete was like, I truly felt like my coach was just enamored by me in a like safe way, obviously, but like the coach's favorite thing to do was watch me perform. And they'd come up and be like, oh my gosh, like we've been working on this and you did this. So, and I remember the athletes saying they would come up and tell me everything I did well. And then they might say one or two things like, next time we practice, we'll work on just X, Y, and Z. But oh my gosh, that was so beautiful what you just did. And it was just, again, that you call it the sandwich effect, what you want. But what I really felt from this athlete was that like this coach was just like so fired up to watch this athlete perform. Like they would show up to game day. Another thing too that coaches don't realize, and I have coaches reach out to me a bunch and be like, I want you to come work with my team. And I have a rule now. I have a policy. If a coach reaches out to me to work with a team, I say I'll work with your team as long as I can work with you as the coach in a twofold fashion. One, you're a performer too. So if you have performance anxiety, that's going to trickle down to your athletes. And also, I need to know that you are willing to have the hard conversations like honesty hour, right? Because 80 to 90% of the athletes, when I start working with them, a lot of their performance anxiety and confidence issues are exacerbated by the coach. A lot of times when I'd bring that up with the coach, they'd be like, I'd never get a call back. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. But I'm not going to go in and be a band-aid approach and then y'all still don't perform well because I can't get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is actually the coach, because the coach is showing up and they're all anxious, and that energy is reverberating to the athlete, because a lot of athletes are more extrinsically motivated than intrinsically. So this coach, though, I remember this athlete being like, man, they would show up to game day and just be like, it was Christmas Day, just like, oh my gosh, this is I cannot wait to watch you perform. I cannot wait to see this. And they were just giddy and jolly and excited, and they were like, I never felt like they were anxious at all. Like, I felt like if I flopped, they would have just been like, did you have fun out there? Did that, And I thought that was really monumental. But we're also talking about like, that coach in and of themselves has particular traits, like their personality, right? Because we have a lot of coaches that have high trait and state anxiety, and that's okay. But we just need to give you tools in your toolbox for how to manage that on game day so that it doesn't wear off on an athlete and
Yeah.
then impede. Coaches have some accountability there on, if your athlete doesn't perform well, a lot of coaches are like, well, maybe I didn't go over X and O too much, and I'm like, no, maybe you just showed up more anxious than you needed to, and that trickled down to the athlete.
Yeah. I have very simple rules for myself, or I don't know if rules, but maybe principles. I don't know what you'd call them for myself around this is number one, what's very important for me is, and it maybe just speaks to sort of what you said, is I don't get defined by wins and losses. Is as a coach, I'm like, I couldn't care less if we win or lose. What's most important to me is learning and growth, because you're 13 years old and the likelihood of you playing this game still when you're 25 is very small. And so there's bigger things and more important things, yeah, than winning and losing. So, there's more the really trying to find the life lessons and really
Yes.
trying to coach to those things more than the win and the loss is way more important to me. Number one. Number two, I have an understanding that every athlete is going to arrive at the game with their own pressure. In other words, their own expectations, how they think they're going to do, their own sense of the challenge that they're facing, whether we're playing stronger or weaker opposition, etc., etc. So they already have that. Number two, they already have their parent on their back. And
Yes.
so as the coach, I just refuse to add more to that. I
Yes.
just refuse to do it. Like I will not be the one that adds pressure. So I will
Yes.
bring the fun, I will bring the learning and the understanding and the growth, and that's what I'm about. Beyond that, I will be the one that tries to take that pressure off you as much as I
Yes.
can. Just
And that's
eliminate, eliminate,
brilliant.
eliminate, eliminate, eliminate,
And that's
rather than
brilliant.
be the person that adds more,
Because if
more
you
to
think
it.
about it, in so many academics is that way. I mean, like, so many subsets, like take society and then microcosms of it, academia, sport, just work in general, like, it's very much that way. There's just pressure all around. And I was searching while you were talking because it reminded me of this quote. So, Man's Search for Meaning, Victor E. Frankl,
Frankel,
that
very
book.
cool book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a quote in there that is so brilliant, and it says, happiness should not be actively pursued, but rather arise as a consequence of finding meaning in life, often through service to others or finding purpose in difficult circumstances. And I wrote this in my book and reworded it a little in saying winning should not be actively pursued, but should arise as a consequence of finding meaning in sport, meaning in life, and finding ways that sport can bring about character right, often through service of others, through service of teammates, through the word competition, for example, is a Latin. In Latin, it breaks down to competere, so com meaning with, petere meaning with others. And so competing with somebody is it's not about domination. Like, at least in Western culture, maybe even in some Eastern cultures, very much about like winning, like I win over you versus a winning with you. And what that really means is when you shake the hands of your opponents, like I think something really beautiful, I think tennis does this. but I'm also not an expert in tennis. My colleague, Dr. Lauer, would probably laugh at me. She heard me say this, especially if I was wrong. I think they like go up, or maybe volleyball does it. They kind of maybe like slap hands before, or when they switch sides of the court, they'll kind of like give little high fives as they switch court. The reason why I think that's a beautiful representation, and I almost think it'd be cool if sports started doing this as a whole, is to go shake the hands of your opponents before the match starts, to insinuate that I'm going to compete with you. I'm not competing against you. And what that means is I'm going to bring my best to the game today. And whoever wins, like, I'm going to respect you enough to literally bring my best level of play today. And if you win out of, like, you're winning out of me giving respect to you, or vice versa. So the win doesn't really matter. It's just a matter, we're going to show up as our best selves today, and whoever wins, that's awesome. Because I helped make you better by me showing up 100%, and you helped make me better by showing up 100%. And it's not about who won or lost. It's just a fact of, let me shake your hand because you made me better today because of how you showed up. And I think we've gotten so far away from the spirit of what competition actually is. We've gotten away. We've centralized winning. Some of that centralization is off hiring, retention, and firing processes for these NGBs. It's attached to money. Again, I think it's going to take a lot of people at a round table having these discussions on how can we try to untether capitalism, which is actually kind of a, and bring in late stage capitalism whenever you want. That's actually really harming. It's not, I don't want to speak in absolutes, but in a lot of ways it is harming. Optimal performance it's harming mental health for coaches, for athletes. And again, it's trickling down. So if we look at it as a tier, it's like you got the athlete, then the coach, then sport admin, and up, right? The umbrella, right, is that capitalism. How can we almost say, like, hey, I understand that's there, but what can we do policy wise, hiring, retention, and firing wise, that can actually help counterbalance this macro thing instead of just mindlessly letting it control us? And I think when we mindfully let it control us, we center winning as the number one, when, like Viktor Frankl says, winning shouldn't be actively pursued. We should actually pursue bringing meaning to our daily lives.
Mm. I think that's a great place to end this conversation. I love that quote. It is my favorite quote out of that book.
Yeah.
It's the only one I can really remember.
Yes, same. I know.
Yeah.
I remember highlighting and being like, oh my gosh, this is so good.
Yeah.
No, but I think I just want to reaffirm, like, it sounds, I mean, a lot of times I'll have coaches I talk to and I try to navigate kind of the hard conversation, but it's been really wonderful speaking to somebody who I'm like, gosh, I appreciate the vulnerability you've brought. I appreciate the, like, openness to some of the things I'm throwing your way and being like, ooh, I see this, and here's some things I can tinker with and change. You were such a representation of a coach that people can model themselves after. And some of that is just having the willingness to be like, I'm human and I'm trying my best and we're doing the best we can. And that's really all we're asking for. It's not this maladaptive perfectionism. It's just, hey, let's bring a little bit more vulnerability into the space, a little bit more fun, and here's some ways to do it. So, like, thank you for sharing your experiences too.
Oh, no. I mean, thank you for the kind words. I've loved this conversation just because I think the way in which you presented sort of things that are actually close to my heart in ways that I could not, like in simple, to me, it's like an understanding I have, and I don't always know if my words do justice to it, where I feel like you shone a light into a space that I'm super passionate about in a simple, hopefully understandable way for other people.
Yeah,
And
awesome.
hopefully some of my examples made it a bit more practical, that they go, oh, okay, cool, we get it, right? This is what Sarah says, and this is how JODY explains it. And, and I think that's pretty good. That it's a pretty awesome conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Sarah, if anybody's listened to this and they want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so my website is dearcoachbook.com. So you can go on there and order the book. There's also something I want to highlight. I worked really hard with my publisher on this. There is a free ebook download on there. So you can, if you scroll down on the homepage, there's the free ebook download there. I love that just for accessibility purposes. So dearcoachbook.com. You can also contact me through there as well. I have, if you want to do like a order the book in bulk, for example, and do a book club situation as well, you can order on there too. or there's some mentoring if you want to work with me one-on-one. You can also do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely encourage people to do all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Yeah, you as well.